Welcome. If you've not been here before, we're glad you're here. My name's Gene. I'm part of the team here at Restore. And it's always a real privilege and a pleasure to be together, to worship Jesus together, and to know that he is here with us. A couple things that I want to just point out before we step into service or we start the message. First of all, next week, no, this is the third week. This is the third week. Am I right? This is coming up. We're in the third week of the month. This is dinner party week. And so if you haven't registered for a dinner party, that's just a way for us to get to know each other. It's low commitment. So if you only have 2 hours, it's 2 hours of your time, and you get to eat good food together at a restaurant. And so you just get online, you register at restore.church, and we'll save a seat for you. Here at Restore, we have a very simple mission. It is to know Jesus and our neighbors. And we live that out by gathering together. We do three things. We gather to worship, we gather to serve, and we gather in relationship. So this morning, if Restore is your home church, we thank you for partnering with us because of your generosity and service. We get to do things like we did last week with Kids Camp. So your investment of time, energy, gifts, finances, that all helps to bring restoration and hope to our community and our world. So lean in, and if you haven't started giving, we'd love for you to step in and give financially to move this mission forward. Often, I have someone say to me, we love your mission. We love what you have started here at Restore. And I always step back a little bit and go, yeah, but if this is your home church, is it your mission too? Because we all ought to embrace this mission and move it forward if we're part of this assembly. All right, well, we've been in 1 week now. This is week number 2 of this new series we're calling Life Without Limits. And today, I want to talk to you about taking the long view. Now, every time I stand up here and I look out over all of you, there's a few of you that are close to my age. But most of you are in that 25 to 45 age. And this is a stage of life that is about building your life. You know what I'm talking about? Like you're building your homes, you're building your careers, you're raising kids, you're building your marriage. This is the time where you've probably or are starting to think about having 5-year plan. I have a 5-year plan, a 5-year goal. You've got a 10-year goal. This is the time where you're executing on the big vision for your life. Like you're really stepping it up. You're going forward. So because we might have a different idea about what does it mean to have long view thinking. What does it mean? And it simply means that when you look at your situation, when you make decisions, you base those decisions on the future, on long-term goals. And sometimes we make those decisions with clarity, and sometimes it's so fuzzy, we just think, okay, we're gonna do the best that we can with this one. And you make those decisions regardless of the short-term setbacks you might experience. You're not looking at the immediate outcomes. You're looking at the long term. You're taking the long view. Now, we may think that the opposite of long view thinking is short-sightedness. So if you're not having long view thinking, maybe you're just short-sighted. But I believe that the partner to long view vision is actually right now obedience. The partner to long view vision is right now obedience. It's obedience in the present moment. Often our vision for the future is actually what sustains us, but God calls us to short-range focus in order to build character. So when things come up against us, when we think there's no way out, that's the time to sink into that present moment to say, what do I have to do right now? What's God calling me to in this moment? Often, our situations where we see current limitations, that's actually the time that we are in the laboratory of God, where he uses those short-term limitations to build a limitless future. This morning, I know that there is no pit you can get into. There is no person you can be connected with and no prison you could be in that can limit your life when you are fully redeemed, fully committed, and fully surrendered to God. Paul has long-term vision when he writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. He says, "For our present troubles are small and they won't last very long, yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them all and will last forever." So, verse 18, we don't look at the troubles we can see now. Rather, we take the long-term vision. We fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen, for the things we see now will soon be gone. But the things we cannot see will last forever. This is the ultimate long view thinking. So, what happens though when the dream stalls? Like you have dreams, you have visions for your life. What happens when there's a setback? What happens when it doesn't pan out the way you expected? What happens if you hate that job you're in? What do you do now? You thought it was going to be one way, now it's another way. What do I do now? For some of us, it's like, am I ever going to be anything other than single? Like I want to get married. When is this all going to happen? Often in this 25 to 45 year age gap, we hit some glass ceilings along the way. We get stuck in routines. Sometimes we get trapped by our past, or we think we're limited by our bank accounts. What happens to you when the speed at which you want to live and realize your dreams doesn't match up with the reality you're living? Most of us have been there at one time or another. When the dreams we were leaning into were really slow in coming to fruition. When in the world is this going to shift? Often this gap that we find ourselves in between the dream we have and the reality we're living can actually breed cynicism, anxiety, even burnout. This is the very real experience of us as human beings as we're learning what it means to build our lives. And frankly, when you're at the other end of the 45 and beyond, this still happens sometimes. And every time it happens, you have to navigate. You have to determine how you're going to navigate that moment. What are you going to do when your health is not what you thought it was? When something is discovered in your body that is gonna just wreck things for a while? What do? You always have to be thinking about those things in the future. Well, there's a story in the Old Testament in Genesis. We're gonna start in Genesis chapter 37. It's a very familiar passage of scripture. Joseph is the main topic here in these scriptures, and Joseph was one of 12 sons of Jacob. And Joseph was 17 years old, and his dad sent him to find his brothers and to see how they're doing they were out in the fields. And as a 17-year-old sometimes can be, now not you guys, like we have very wise 17-year-olds here at Restore, but sometimes the wisdom of the ages hasn't set in yet. And here's where we see Joseph had vision for his life. He had dreams for his life, and yet he didn't know how to discern when to speak those dreams and when to just keep them to himself. And so he had this dream that he was out in the fields with his brothers and his dad, and they were working with the grain, and they were his grain that he was putting together into a stalk. That grain stood up, and his did, and his brothers and his dad all bowed down to him. Well, this is pretty offensive to his family. This is a 17-year-old. He's like the youngest, and he's telling us we're going to bow down to him. Well, he was actually prophesying for the future, but they didn't know that at that moment. It was very mysterious. And so as he goes out to see his brothers, they're not too keen on him. In fact, they hate him. They think he is nothing more than the younger brother who thinks he's all that. Besides, he's got this coat of multiple colors that his dad created for him. And so he comes out, and he comes out to the field, and they look to see where he's coming, and they say, "Here comes the dreamer." I actually love that. I want people to say, "Here comes the dreamer," when I walk into the room. Here's the guy that has dreams and visions for his life, for his future. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. Joseph was having dreams, and he was living the reality of his life. The dreams hadn't come to fruition yet, but these dreams spoke of the vision of leadership that he had. What he was attempting to figure out was, he's now in the cistern. He's in a pit. He's in a dark hole because his brothers have decided to just do away with him and put him down into this hole. And now he has to try to figure out, how do I stay faithful with God's promise when God's promises sound so good, but the reality is this dark hole. See, he couldn't control his brothers. He couldn't control the pit, and he couldn't control his destination. All he could control in that moment in the pit was his response. We find ourselves there sometimes, where the only thing we have control of is our thinking in that moment, our actions in that moment. See, God is still good, even when the script of our life changes. The dreams we have, but reality hasn't given those dreams fruition yet. Even when that happens, God is still good. See, the pit, the people, the destination that he was headed to, that couldn't be limited because God had his hand on him. In Genesis, now we move over to Genesis 39. And at this point, Joseph's brothers actually sold him to the Ishmaelites who were coming. A caravan of Ishmaelites was coming through. They sold him and he was taken as a slave to Egypt. And when he gets to Egypt, he is sold to Potiphar. And so Potiphar is this guy that is like a couple tiers down from Pharaoh. So think of him as the head of the Secret Service. He was the head of security for Potiphar, or for Pharaoh. And so now he's working as a slave in Potiphar's house. Potiphar bought him, and he's now a slave in this Egyptian household. And in verse 2 from chapter 39, the Lord was with Joseph. So he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. This pleased Potiphar so much that he made Joseph his personal attendant. Then he put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. And from that day, Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property. The Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. Let me pause for just a minute. When you are, even in a foreign country, when you are in a foreign space, when you're in a place where you are not accustomed to being, and you are faithful to what God is calling you to, the people around you will experience the blessing of God in their life because of your presence, because you bring the presence of Jesus into that space. This is what was happening with Joseph and in Potiphar's household. All of his household affairs ran smoothly, his crops and livestock flourished, and so Potiphar gave Joseph everything, complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about a thing except what he was going to eat. Now, Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man, and Potiphar's wife soon had her eye on him. And she said, "Here, come and sleep with me." But Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." Here he is, young man in Potiphar's household, He has been given the opportunity for limitless pleasure and power with really zero perceived consequences in that moment. And yet he says, I'm not stepping into that. I am resisting temptation here. He was in a foreign space, in a foreign land. He was in a home that was not his own. He was working as a slave. Often when we live in obscurity, that's the time that we're tempted to cut corners and to compromise. What is an opportunity to not live according to his values was a moment where he decided, Joseph said, I'm not doing that. When we are in the dark, when we are alone, those are the times where we decide, am I going to live with excellence in this moment? Or am I going to cut corners? Am I going to cut corners to compromise to get ahead faster? True long-view character is always forged by doing the right thing, even when there's not this immediate payoff. I see Joseph here putting a limit on his flesh to keep his soul free and uncompromised for what God was preparing to do with him in his life. Here's a principle. Compromise always limits us. It limits our future, but integrity makes it limitless. So last week I said, what would it take for you to just blow the ceiling off your perceived limits? Well, step into integrity. Don't compromise. And you're on the right track to make that happen. So he's in Potiphar's household. He's serving there. Potiphar's wife says, hey, he tried to do this to me. And here's his cloak, because she grabbed his cloak as he was running out of the house. So the story goes. And she takes it to Potiphar and says, he tried to rape me. He's trying to come against this household. And Potiphar says that, well, he's going to go to prison. And so he puts him in prison. And the way the scriptures read in chapter 40, it would indicate that he was put into the prison that Potiphar actually oversaw. So the prison that was reserved for the king's prisoners. And that's where Joseph found himself in Genesis chapter 40. He's there and he's got Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and the chief baker. They had offended their royal master. They had offended Pharaoh. And so they got thrown in prison. We don't know what happened exactly, but they were in prison, and Joseph finds himself in the same space. And so while they're in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they both looked upset. Why are you so worried today? He asked them. And they replied, we both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean. And I love this. Interpreting dreams is God's business. And he didn't say it in these words necessarily, but I believe he was pointing to the ability that he had to interpret these dreams. And he wasn't saying, oh, tell me the dreams because I can tell you. No, God's specialty is not only giving us dreams, but helping us fulfill those dreams. But he said, go ahead and tell me your dreams. Joseph is in prison. When we find ourselves in the prison of our own making, what happens? It's really easy to lose focus, right? It's really easy to lose focus, to begin thinking about my pain, my career problems, my discomfort. It's called being self-absorbed. It's called not seeing the good that I can do that is right in front of me. But watch how Joseph sees the cupbearer and how he sees the baker and how he's paying attention. In verse 9, he says, go ahead and tell me your dreams. He's intent on serving others, even while his own dreams are on hold, even while he's in prison. and it seems like his own dreams are just dead in the water. See, if you're waiting to serve till you have a big platform, you're missing the promises of God already at work right in front of you. If only I had that platform, if only I was this well known, if only I had this many followers, then I'm sure that I could impact my world. When in fact, your world is the one you're in right now. Doing the next right thing in front of you is the space that God calls us to. Ultimately, Joseph does so well with Potiphar's house. He interprets these dreams while in prison. And then Pharaoh has a dream. And lo and behold, the good he did in prison now followed him with a good word to Pharaoh. Because he had dreams that he couldn't discern. He couldn't interpret. Pharaoh had dreams that were troubling to him. And so he asked, who can interpret these dreams? And finally, Pharaoh was told about Joseph. And Joseph heard the dreams, again, pointing to God as his source. And he writes, and we see this in verse 39, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. Joseph finds himself moving from the pit to Potiphar's house, to prison, and now to the palace, where he is essentially the prime minister of Egypt. The story continues that he saves the nation from famine. His brothers come because they've run out of grain. And he is able to look at them and say, you meant it for harm, but God meant it for good. You meant it for harm, but God meant it for good. This is a key component of taking the long view, of long view thinking, is understanding that what was meant for our harm, sometimes it's just our circumstances, sometimes it is people that we're connected with who meant harm for us, who did us wrong. And we get to either lean into that and say, they did this to me, to live there, to be hurt for an indefinite period of time, or we get to actually seek the healing of our souls, seek the healing of our hearts. Joseph had long view thinking that allowed him to move through all those stages, through all those difficult times, and come to the place where he has influence that is like no other in the land. So, how do we practically put this together? What do you do tomorrow to make this come to life in your own world? There's a couple things. First of all, I think you have to change the metric. So 10-year goals are great, but we need to stop measuring ourselves by whether or not we're on track to accomplish those. Instead, think about this as a daily question. What does obedience look like in the next 60 minutes? What do I do right now that is actually going to move the needle? Number 2 is audit your attitude. Stop blaming your boundaries. It's so easy to blame others, our boundaries, our circumstances, the things we think box us in. But instead, how about we serve God right where we are? Often we might say, oh, I'm gonna blame the fact that I don't have enough money, I don't have a better boss, or I need a different season of life. But you guys, if we're in a frustrating career or a life season, it's important for us to do as Joseph did and look around and see who needs encouragement around us, who needs a good word, who needs us to see them and recognize them. Joseph proved that God does his most limitless work in highly limited spaces. The pit. The pit. I don't know what you think about when the world starts closing in around you. But I would guess that you're tempted to lean into despair. That would be normal. What is abnormal is for us to look at our circumstances and go, God is with me. God is with me. I can do all things through Christ. I can do all things through the strength that he gives me. Some of you in this last year have walked out of the pit. You have elevated out of it. You're not down there anymore. You've determined that taking the long view is exactly the life you're going to live. And I would venture to guess that there are many of us in various stages of this dark hole that we can find ourselves in. I hope this morning is an encouragement for you to really consider, well, audit your attitude. How are you thinking about this? Number 3 is commit to micro integrity. Okay, so obey in the macro vision, right? You in the big picture, you're obeying. And then trust God with that. The big breakthrough is going to come when you build on the small choices nobody sees. Obey in the micro, trust God with the macro. We had a whole lot of kids in the space this past week. And we had a whole bunch of people doing micro, small things. The combination of all of those micro tasks, the boring, mundane things of life, meant that we could have a macro experience for these kids. Some of you were in the kitchen. You were washing dishes, you were making sandwiches, you were doing tedious, mundane tasks. But what I saw was a group of people paying attention to those micro details so that the macro experience could be had. Would you stand with me? Joseph's life shows that living a life without limits doesn't mean doing whatever you want. Let me say that again. Joseph's life shows that living a life without limits doesn't mean doing whatever you want. It means realizing that no human circumstance can limit what God wants to do through you. Joseph didn't get to the palace by having a perfect strategic plan. I think Joseph had great vision for his life, but Joseph didn't know all the nuances of that journey. The turns, the curves, the uphill, the ditch that he would fall into. But he got there because in the pit and in Potiphar's house and in prison, he did the next right thing in front of him. Now, I often look over all of you and I say, if you're at your career, at your job, and you're doing a great work, like you're on time every day, you're not complaining, you're actually leaning in, you're leading the charge, maybe you're even the boss. Maybe you're not the boss, but you are performing like one, like an owner. When someone says to you, where do I find more of you? I hope that you are saying, well, let me introduce you to Restore Church. Because there's a whole bunch of people there that are like-minded, that have a long view of their life, who are committed to doing the next right thing. That's what I always hope for us as a people. That we know where we can find more of us, but that requires us to live a life of integrity, to do the next right thing in front of us. And when we get into the pit, and when we get into Potiphar's house, where there may be temptation in front of us, when we feel like we're boxed in and we can't move anymore where we are, we're in this prison, that we don't lean into despair, but we ask Jesus to empower us for the next moment ahead of us. That's where the win is. That's where we find life. That's where we find hope for the future.